Thank you all for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to do a quick speech, about 5 minutes, and then I'll turn it over to questions and answers. Please ask questions. The harder, the better. I love them. Okay, I'm going to make a series of radical claims. And at first, it's going to seem like none of this could happen, and you're right. Given the situation that our government and our people in California are right now, none of this is possible. But with a shift, as proposed in the book, California's Next Century, it's over there, I'll show it around later, all of this does become possible. First, the radical claims. 1, half of your taxes gone. 2, half of the bureaucracy over every business in the state removed. 3, California out of debt almost instantaneously. 50,000 new blue-collar jobs, 200,000 new white-collar jobs. Local control return to the counties and cities like you haven't seen since the 1960s. And a qualitative jump in the capacity and quality of every elected official and every government official like you've never seen before. Let me throw in a few more. Increased international trade for America. A recession-proof economy for California for the next 100 years. And the promise that you, your kids, your grandkids, and possibly your grandkids' will never go through a recession like the ones you're living through right now. I know, a bit radical. All of this is true, and at the same time. Again, as proposed in California's Next Century, I'll explain how. First, a quick history lesson. So in the next 20 to 40 years, there's going to be new superpowers with the same amount of money and finance and power, raw power, as America. Russia, the EU is already richer than America. We don't typically talk about that. But new ones such as India, China, Brazil, and possibly a Southeast Asian collective. The last 70 years, the world was roughly broken up into 2 spheres. Democracy and capitalism as championed by America, and then communism. No choices on your economic decisions and on your personal decisions. So most people kind of sided with the democratic aspect. After the fall of communism, somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, the rest of the world realized that some form of democracy and capitalism was the way to go. But as you can see, China's a capitalist country, and they have some democracy at a low level, but they don't act like America. Yes, they will make trade deals, and they'll trade money, and they're not actually communist, but again, they're not the USA. So what happens in the future, 20 to 40 years, when there's that sort of difference between America and China, not just with one country, but with 5 other superpowers? What happens then, when everybody has their own different idea of how capitalism should work, and each one is as powerful as America? Well, we've seen a situation like this before. Roughly the 1880s to 1910. Some people call that the lead up to World War I and World War II. Some people see that as one long war. You had new powers. Their names were Japan, Germany, and Italy. Previous European powers had established and controlled parts of the globe, and now these new countries rose up, and they were rising and becoming just as powerful as the other European powers. And they wanted their piece of the pie. For a while, things worked out. International trade grew. But then, the places where all of these countries kept talking, Japan just walked out. Germany just walked out. Italy just walked out. And within a few years you had World War I, World War II. Documented thoroughly in the book. There are some foreign policy experts now saying that we are entering a period that mirrors this 1880 to 1910 period, as you have new powers rising. Here's why. China is going to less UN meetings and less IMF meetings. Russia's doing the same. India's doing the same. Brazil's doing the same. And the Southeast Asians, in a possible collective, maybe named ASEAN, are looking at the same thing. Here's why. They don't feel that the UN and the IMF represents them. And there's something to that. The UN and the IMF were built by Europe and America after World War II so that Europe and America could retain power. Here's the proof. There's never been a non-European or American over-secretary in the UN or general secretary in the IMF, ever. Every single president, every single person who's overseen the IMF, the UN, and all these international institutions for the last 70 years has always been European and always been American. So the Indians, the Chinese, the Brazilians, the Russians, and possibly the Southeast Asians are saying, we haven't been in charge for 70 years and you're saying you represent us? They're not buying it. Here's what they're doing. They're making their own UN. They're making their own IMF. Shanghai Cooperation Council, Russia has one, Brazil has one. They want their own sphere of influence where they're treated with the same amount of power as America. And they're taking over parts of the world that America used to be the only sole representative of influence in. Things are increasingly going this way, and they're increasingly pulling away out of the old order of negotiation and discussion, just like happened right before World War I. So what happens, and what can we do to stop that? I argue in California's Next Century that California is the only place, land, area, looking on the face of the planet, that can serve the new role as the discussion center for the next century. Here's why. Most of the discussions amongst national powers from the 1700s through the 1800s, and some say up to 2000, happened in a little city called Geneva, Switzerland. If you look up shipping deals, telephone deals, trade deals, business deals, peace, negotiation, everything, going back the last 200 to 300 years, almost all of them were signed in Geneva. Some of them did happen in the UN, but that was later. And only recently has Geneva sort of lost that role. 2 years ago, the mayor and the government both said that our role as a diplomatic negotiation center for the entire world can no longer be held in Geneva, Switzerland. They cannot do it anymore. They've held this role for the last 200 years, and they themselves have said they can no longer do it. So they can say they can't do it. The world's pulling out of the old orders. New orders are starting to form. Looks similar. We can keep global peace, and we can make ourselves rich here in California by fulfilling the economic model that Switzerland had over the last 200 years, but for us, for the next century, hence California's next century. The book goes into reasons why only California is the place that can follow this role, and how if it doesn't, well, the pattern on the wall is very similar to one before. Maybe nothing happens, but why risk World War III when you have the chance to make yourself the richest country in the entire planet? Switzerland has been the richest country in all of the world for the last 200 years, and they've been essentially recession-proof for the last century. This isn't by accident. It's because they made themselves the global negotiation center. We can follow that role. And what I'm also arguing is that besides making ourselves and our lives better and recession-proof, we need to do this for the rest of the world. I'll turn it over to questions.